Hello, I'm Dr. Lisa College and welcome to episode 50 of Culture by Neurodesign. I'm so proud to have reached this milestone and to be sharing my 50th conversation about the new leadership playbook and about designing our working culture to truly bring out the best in our teams. Now, I've been considering a few ideas to make this 50th episode extra special, but it turns out that I don't need to use any of them because I'm sharing some other really exciting news, which is that I've been named Leadership Consultant of the Year in the Corporate LiveWire Innovation and Excellence Awards 2025. It's a huge honour, of course, and it's also a good reason to celebrate, but more than that, it's a good point to just pause and reflect on what that recognition means for the ideas behind my work. And that's what I'm going to focus on in this 50th episode. At the end of this episode, I'll also announce a brand new free resource to celebrate the award, the podcast milestone, and to thank you for your support. Now, for a long time, I thought that someone's performance wasn't absolute. Someone was either a high performer or a low performer, a straight A student or not, a high potential employee or not. And I think that our systems reinforce that view. And once you get a label attached, it tends to become self-fulfilling. But as I've moved through my career and as I've worked with so many different people in different functions and industries and from different countries, different interests and experiences, people who've been through very diverse hardships and celebrated very diverse successes. As I did this, I began to realize how wrong that earlier thinking is. And now I believe that everyone has the potential to be a high performer if only they find themselves in the right circumstances. And this isn't a religion. It's not a belief in something that I can't see and measure. I've seen that we can shape culture so that something much closer to everyone's ideal working circumstances can exist. And I've seen and measured what happens to motivation and enjoyment and engagement and talent retention and impact on our mission. And I know that when we're intentional about our working culture, we can turn a load of energy, a load of effort that's often just dissipated into nothing because of interpersonal friction and diplomacy that's not always necessary, because of firefighting, because of one-upmanship. All that wasted energy can turn into impact. And people who may have been overlooked as not being a high performer, according to a very narrow definition of what being a high performer is, those people can step up and thrive. And performance stops being about a handful of stars and it starts being a collective property of the whole team. Now, I said that I've experienced this, and the first time that I did experience it was when I was leading on a major transformation of a global marketing organization, which, for a series of reasons, had become a toxic and not very nice place to work. Now, the EVP with whom I was leading this shift took a series of really brave steps, which are a whole story on their own, but that isn't where I want to focus right now. I want to focus on an outcome to emphasize how extraordinary the team performance became when you are intentional about your working culture and when you invest strategically in building it. Now, you have to remember that this was a team which was really, really hurting. It had the lowest ENPS rating, Employee Net Promoter Score, in the whole company by a long way. But we asked them to trust us, the leadership, and trust each other. We asked them to value and respect each other's differences. In fact, we asked them to put themselves in teams where there was no other person like themselves, so that every single team had the best chance of succeeding in their particular piece of the marketing puzzle. Now, I think that was remarkable enough, but what was also incredible is that this team collectively and additionally decided to flip to Agile. Agile's a way of working that relies on each other, and it integrates that reliance in how you operate every day. So this team voted to go much further than we ever thought they would. It's a way of working that's often seen in tech and product, but not in marketing. So just in itself, it was a really innovative and brave move from the group. But the move also meant that the leadership became distributed. It wasn't an easy move. We built a matrix of squad leaders, reporting leaders, and a type of leader which I'll focus on more now, Scrum Masters. Now, if you're not familiar with Scrum Masters, let me give you a bit of background. The Scrum is a productive tussle in the way of working in a team. And the Scrum Master is like the referee, making sure that everyone in Scrum plays by the rules that that Scrum team has agreed. They're not in the limelight, right? They don't make all the big customer-facing calls. They don't own the strategy, but they are highly skilled in something which is really subtle and powerful. They're highly skilled in keeping the team on track and in creating the conditions for good conversations and making sure that every voice is heard, making sure that everyone can contribute. And remember that everyone was needed to succeed, because each person put themselves in a team where other people with the skills that they had were not present. And here's the thing, a good Scrum Master isn't noticeable until they're absent, and then you notice. Now, the reason that I'm focusing on the Scrum Master role is that it gave people who weren't traditional leaders, people who were not on the leadership track, perhaps people with little or no interest in managing or becoming strategic or in having meetings with the executive leadership team. The Scrum Master hat gave these people a different kind of opportunity to lead, to shape their squads and their squad's output. And they made it possible for very different kinds of leadership, a very quiet, facilitative, connecting, extremely skillful form of leadership. It made it possible for that form of leadership to shine. And what I saw was that these people who had never really been labeled high performers in the old system, they stood up and they wanted to take on this extra responsibility. And they were suddenly indispensable leaders. So we created a culture which enabled their skills, their style, and their presence to be part of what enabled their team to do its best work, alongside the more traditional squad leads and reporting leads. So this is one of the experiences that really convinced me that performance isn't fixed in individuals. It emerges when the culture and the systems around people allow them to excel. So this experience was one of the motivations for me to take this idea and turn it into a system. And now let me come back to the Corporate LiveWire Award. So when Corporate LiveWire considered my nomination for Leadership Consultant of the Year, they specifically asked about the innovations which I bring to my leadership consulting. And I described 5 innovations, which I'm going to walk you through now, as practical levers that you can pull as a leader. And they're practical levers that I partner with team leads on. Now, I'm going to go through them pretty quickly, but I'll also note that I've written an article if you want to take them at a slower pace. And that article also refers to some more in-depth resources if you want to dive in anywhere more deeply. And the link to that article is in the episode notes. So the first innovation that I highlighted to Corporate LiveWire was that traditional DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, focuses on quotas, on getting a certain proportion of women or people of colour or whatever diversity dimension is being focused on, getting a certain proportion of that dimension into specific roles. Now, representation matters, of course, representation matters, but simply targeting quotas oversimplify people who are almost never one thing or the other, and they don't typically set the people placed in positions up for success, and they can also do a really good job of building resentment in those who don't happen to fall into the group getting the attention. So I look for something else that would be fair, that would include everyone, not just a chosen few. And I focused on cognitive inclusion. This is my first innovation. So what does that mean, cognitive inclusion? Well, every one of us has got a particular neuro style, a thinking style, a way in which we engage with information. And that neuro style is shaped by different blends of particular cognitive or thinking traits. Some of us happen to be at the extremes of those traits, and some of us are autistic or dyslexic or ADHD or otherwise neurodivergent. But because the basic traits are shared, and because we're all at different positions on those same scales, when leaders design systems for those neurodivergent extremes, they lift everybody. They lift 100% of people. And that is the power of cognitive inclusion. It's universal design, the first innovation I highlighted. Universal design means that if you build for the edge cases, it works better for everyone. And what you need to remember from this first innovation is that designing for the cognitive extremes, designing for neurodivergence, unlocks performance opportunities for everyone. Now, the second innovation is what I refer to as culture over compliance. So if we now just focus on disability inclusion, and the traditional disability inclusion model is legally compliant, of course. If someone discloses a diagnosis, then you must, as an employer of a particular size, make a reasonable adjustment. But in practice, that model is not especially scalable. It's difficult to sustain, and so it's not very attractive for an organization. So it can easily feel like an organization is doing the minimum possible. It's also not fair to those who don't happen to have a diagnosis, even though those same kind of changes would very likely help them. And it's not fair in that it depends on the most vulnerable members of our team members speaking up about their diagnosis, about something which they find challenging and may have been victimized for in the past. The smarter way is not to wait to react as your primary mechanism to be inclusive. The smarter way is to design culture that anticipates difference. And you can't avoid cognitive diversity, and you can't avoid its extreme neurodivergence. So when cognitive inclusion is built into your team norms, into your organizational culture, most neurodivergent people will thrive by default. They'll thrive without needing to prove a diagnosis and without needing to speak up. And then the reactive accommodations route becomes the supplement rather than the main strategy. So what you need to know, what you need to remember about this second innovation is that sustainable inclusion is anticipatory. If you design it into your culture and don't only spring into action after somebody who has had to tell you that they're struggling so much that they need help, then things will improve so much more. The third innovation that I highlighted was about neuro-inspired teams, not just individuals, the focus on neuro-inspired teams. Now, we've talked about this already when I shared the anecdote about the marketing organization, but I think it's worth repeating. Performance nowadays is a function of the team. It's not a function of the individual. And there's a lot of data to show this. My own experience, the story that I told, proves it. But I've shared some of this data and some of this experience before, and there are some links in the article that I mentioned for further reading or further listening. Individual superstars don't guarantee your results. In fact, if you rely on individual superstars, they can harm your results. What drives success now is how your team interacts, how your team shares trust, how your team makes decisions together. That's the level that we need to nurture. Of course, we must see people as individuals as well. That's key. But the driver of engagement, of happiness, of performance, of innovation, of being able to respond to AI, or of being acquired, or COVID, or whatever other disruption is heading your way, the driver of all these things that leaders need to worry about nowadays is the team, not the individual. So when leaders design their teams as systems, when they value cognitive diversity, when they enable that cognitive diversity with cognitive inclusion, which is psychological safety, respect, and curiosity, then leaders create the conditions where high performance emerges collectively and actually inevitably. So what you need to remember from this third innovation is that it's the team that is the system that drives results. Now, innovation 4, which I shared, was about my future-ready team pathway. And many organizations pretty much leave neurodivergence inclusion, or its broader version, cognitive inclusion, to their ERGs, employee resource groups. And these groups bring incredible community passion and awareness to the organizations. And I have the highest respect for the leaders of these groups. I used to be one as well. But they can't deliver sustained change organization-wide on their own, which is often the situation that they are trying to tackle. So I built the Future Ready Team Pathway, a 7-step roadmap which combines neurodivergence inclusive best practices with evidence-based change management. And this pathway helps leaders to role model instead of to dictate. It helps them to engage employees in co-designing and co-owning their team culture and their organizational culture. And it helps upskill people with tools to make sure that the working culture evolves as the needs of the team and of the organization evolve. It's not just theory, it's a tested mechanism. And all-out cultural change is a big step. And it's something that doesn't happen overnight. But this pathway, this Future Ready Team pathway, de-risks that cultural change and makes it stick. So what you should remember from this 4th innovation is that cultural change lasts when it's leadership-led, when it's systemic, and when it's reinforced daily by lots of people, everyone in your organization working within agreed team norms. And the 5th and final innovation that I talked about was my FIT framework. So let me explain the FIT framework. Every leader I work with wants to know, Lisa, how do I turn inclusion from aspiration into something that my team actually lives every day and that boosts my team's impact? Now, answering that question is why I created my FIT framework. And FIT stands for fair, intentional, and team-minded. They're essentially my golden rules, right? And they're obviously designed to be simple, memorable anchors that help leaders and help their teams to integrate inclusion into their daily work. So it's not a huge extra burden that they have to do on top of already very busy jobs and on top of already high responsibilities. Now, we've covered these words before in this discussion, but I'll just shine a light on them briefly now. So the F, the fair, means that your team culture doesn't favour or penalise any one particular cognitive style, but it allows every participant in your team to focus their energy on impact instead of focusing it on managing distractions. The I is intentional, which means that as a leader, you assume that cognitive diversity, including neurodivergence, is always present in your team. You don't wait for it to be disclosed. You assume it's there, and you proactively design a neuro-inclusive culture instead of waiting to leap into action only when someone discloses. And the M is the T is team-minded. FIT ends with a T, Lisa, not an M. T for team-minded. So every member of the team, with whichever function, whichever seniority, whichever experience they have, every team member shares a common responsibility for reinforcing cognitive inclusion through a clear framework. So when leaders apply FIT, less energy leaks away unnecessarily, less energy is wasted. Teams can recalibrate when their dynamics shift, like when somebody leaves or somebody joins. And the differences between members of your team stop being a liability for you to manage and firefight, and they become an asset instead. So what you need to know from this 5th innovation, which I shared with Corporate LiveWire, is that my FIT framework is your operational compass. Your golden rules, if you like. It's how your culture can keep on generating high performance in a motivated and enjoyable way, day in, day out. So those are the 5 innovations that I highlighted and that were partly responsible for me being recognised as Leadership Consultant of the Year by Corporate LiveWire. And I think it's so important that these innovations and that working culture has been recognised by the organisation, because we're all working now in such a complex time. We have all these disruptors going on. Generation Z is entering the workforce with very different expectations to what we're used to. So I'm actually starting to hear now occasionally about 2 camps occurring in some organisation, a Gen Z camp with their expectations and a more experienced, perhaps some would say older school camp with different expectations. Our economic conditions also mean that very few teams are growing. Very few budgets are growing up. People are all being asked to do more with the same resources or with less resource, and it's really difficult. It's stressful. And the old leadership playbook, which says more motivation, more process, more structure, that just doesn't work anymore. There's nothing more to be got in that way. Our team leaders need new systems and new tools, and most importantly, a new mindset, a mindset that everybody can be a high performer if we invest in shaping our culture to make it possible. And leaders can learn to lead in that way. It is learnable. So that's really why this award matters to me. Of course, I'm happy that my name's on it. That's always nice. But it really matters because it validates this important message on a global stage and across industries. So here we are, nearly at the end of episode 50, with an award recognising leadership consulting that's rigorous, courageous, and, I hope, as you're listening, uplifting to you. But we know that awards are milestones, right? They're not the finish. And the real work to shape our culture so that everyone can be the top performer that we've been talking about, that real work is still ahead. And that's why I'm announcing something new. So to celebrate these 2 milestones, I'm launching a presentation series, short, free, lunch and learn style sessions. Now, from where I come from in Yorkshire, we'd say short, sharp sessions, but it's really a tongue twister, so I probably won't call them that. But anyway, in these short sessions, I'll share actionable ideas that you can use to start shaping your team culture, to stop wasting all that effort and to redirect that effort that you don't need to throw away, to redirect it to high performance. You can sign up on my channel, Neuro-Inspired, on the Crowdcast platform. And if you sign up and you can't join live, don't worry. Everyone who registers will get access to the recordings. If you'd like to get notified about new, free, let's try it, short, sharp sessions, yes, I did it. If you'd like to get notified about new ones of those coming up, then the best thing to do is to sign up for my newsletter, and I will include the links in the episode notes. Finally, thank you so much, bold leaders, for taking the journey with me to episode 50 of Culture by Neurodesign, and for being ready to step away from that old leadership playbook and to co-create the new one with your team. Because remember, everyone can be a high performer when we leaders shape the right culture. Thanks for listening.